I heard it before I saw it. A thin, rasping sound dragged through the air like someone trying to pull their last breath through a cracked plastic tube. Oklahoma mornings are usually quiet, just the shuffle of wind across cornfields, a distant crow now and then. But that sound, isolated, out of rhythm, made me hit the brakes. My heartbeat slowed in my chest. I pulled off onto the dirt shoulder, dust rising in a golden cloud across the windshield. When I killed the engine, silence crashed down. Only that harsh, wheezing rasp remained, fragile but relentless. I opened the door, eased it shut so the latch barely clicked. My boots sank into dry earth, gravel crunching sharply under the soles. Ahead, on the pale morning dust, two small shapes lay still. From a distance, they looked like lumps of coal abandoned on the roadside. A few steps closer, the truth came into focus and froze my breath in my throat. One puppy lay on its side, skeletal frame caked in dirt, black and tan coat dulled to ash. Its head was trapped inside a cloudy soda bottle, the neck wedged tight around its throat, turned into a choking collar. The flesh beneath had swollen purple, angry ridges cutting deep into skin. Each breath was nothing but a ragged hiss, scraping through the scratched plastic. Its belly bulged unnaturally, taut and trembling with the effort of trying to stay alive. I was watching life drain away by the second, but it was the figure beside him that cut deeper. Another puppy, smaller, black and tan as well, stood close as a sentinel. It didn't bark. It didn't flee. It planted its paws into the dirt as though it could shield its friend from the whole world. Now and then it bent down to lick the swollen skin around the bottle, then lifted its head to stare at me. Those eyes, bright, wide, raw with fear and hope, struck harder than any scream. They asked only one question. What will you do? Are you the savior or another threat? I dropped to my knees, heat searing through my jeans, the acrid smell of warming plastic mixed with scorched grass filling my throat. From that low angle, the scene was clearer. The bottle was no accident. It was a noose of glassy plastic, biting deeper with every struggle. Dried blood darkened the fur beneath it. I swallowed hard, forcing my heartbeat steady. Years as a firefighter had put me face to face with suffocation before, but never had my chest been hammered this way. The little guardian trembled all over, not from wind, but from restraint. It could have wandered off in search of food or water, yet it stayed. Each time the trapped pup stirred, it let out a soft whine, thin as a knife against silence. I drew a breath and spoke low, softer than wind. It's okay. I'm not here to hurt you. I didn't know which one I was speaking to, the one choking inside the bottle or the one guarding him. I only knew my voice couldn't shake. If I made a wrong move, they'd bolt into the brush, and the fragile chance of survival would vanish right there. The sentinel blinked once, didn't advance or retreat, just shifted slightly, opening the view. The full misery lay bare. The bottle's cloudy neck cutting into flesh, the swollen throat, the breath dragging like a torn thread. I felt as though I stood before a fragile doorway, and its gatekeeper was a 4-month-old pup. From my truck, I pulled the small first aid kit, a clean cloth, and a water bottle. I didn't dare touch the bottle yet. Instead, I dripped water along its edge, letting it slide into the narrow space. The trapped pup's tongue rasped greedily against it, the faintest sound echoing inside the plastic. The little guardian's gaze tracked every drop as if guarding treasure. For a moment, the world seemed to collapse inward. The wind held still. The crows fell silent. Only my own heartbeat thundered in my ears, paired with the thin, strangled breaths that measured out time like grains in an hourglass. And in that suspended second, I knew, if I had kept driving, if I hadn't stopped, this would have become a regret carved into me for life. People often ask me, where did they come from? Why were they out there, in the middle of that barren stretch no one visits? The truth is, I don't know. Maybe Duke and Sadie were born on that ground. Maybe someone dumped them when they were still no bigger than a hand. In towns like Tulsa, abandoned puppies aren't rare. But one thing was certain. They had only each other. The patch where I found them was once a construction site, a project long abandoned. Years had stripped it down to nothing but rusted steel frames jutting from the earth, red-brown like dried blood. Bent sheets of tin shrieked when the wind cut through, throwing long shadows across cracked dirt. A few rotting boards leaned half-fallen, torn apart by storms and time. No one came there except the homeless seeking shelter or stray dogs sniffing for scraps. And yet, in that wasteland, 2 small lives had carved out a presence. Neighbors said they sometimes glimpsed the pups slipping through the rusted fence, chasing a tumble of leaves or sprawling on a patch of weeds to soak in the sun. Duke usually led, quick and daring. Sadie trailed half a step behind, ears stiff, eyes scanning, the silent shadow that guarded every move. I could picture it so vividly. 2 4-month-old souls, innocent, believing the whole world was a game. That ruined construction site wasn't a graveyard to them. It was treasure. Every rusted can, every drifting plastic bag, every scrap of paper could be turned into a toy. For Duke, everything begged to be explored. For Sadie, the only duty was not to let him vanish from sight. Their natures were clear even from the first moment. Duke was the adventurer, the one to slip through the gap in the fence, to bury his nose in any strange scent. Sadie was different, cautious, hesitant, but willing to crush her fear if Duke cried out. They were 2 halves of a whole, one the trailblazer, one the protector. And yet the questions wouldn't leave me. What had they eaten in the last few days? What had they drunk? Had anyone ever touched them gently? The truth was, no one knew. In a place like that, puppies didn't last long. They couldn't hunt, couldn't outrun danger. Still, Duke and Sadie had endured, propped up only by instinct and the one bond they still possessed. That morning, the wind carried scents from town, leftover food from a roadside diner, engine oil from the old garage, and, sharpest of all, the syrupy sweetness of a tossed soda bottle. For a playful pup like Duke, it must have been irresistible. I could see him nosing at the rim, tasting the last sticky trace. One flicker of curiosity, and the trap was set. Sadie must have been right there too, nostrils flaring, but instinct held her back. When Duke shoved his head in and couldn't pull free, she would have been the first to panic, the first to bite the plastic, the first to whimper for help. From that instant, their nightmare began, one pup weakening breath by breath, the other taking on the impossible duty of keeping him alive. And as I sat on that dirt roadside, staring into their eyes, the truth struck me. The tragedy hadn't begun with the bottle. It began with neglect, with a project left to rot, with a town that had learned to look away from small, suffering lives. And in that silence, 2 Doberman pups had stumbled onto something rarer than food, a love that wouldn't leave. I wiped the sweat from my brow, eyes locked on them. In the ruins of Tulsa, among steel bones and weeds, those fragile shapes stood as proof that sometimes survival doesn't come from strength at all. It comes from having someone who refuses to let go. That morning, the Oklahoma sky was pale and flawless, blue as glass. The wind carried the scent of ripening corn from the fields and a faint sweetness drifting in from town. To me, it was nothing more than the everyday fragrance of the Midwest, but to the sharp noses of 2 puppies, it was a universe of smells. I could picture it. Duke, restless and bold, charging ahead on small legs, ears pricked, tail wagging. Everything was a new adventure waiting to be claimed. Sadie, as always, trailed a half step behind, slowing whenever Duke raced too far, glancing around with cautious eyes. Together they spun in endless circles of daring and restraint, two pieces fitting into one rhythm. That morning, though, the wind carried something else, a smell I now believe was fate. The sharp, syrupy scent of stale soda. Worthless to humans, irresistible to a hungry pup. A gardener nearby told me he'd once seen the two of them running toward the corner lot where trash collected. Wind piled up shards of glass, beer cans, plastic bags, and crumpled cartons. In that heap lay the bottle. A large plastic soda bottle, narrow at the neck, wide at the belly, with streaks of amber sweetness still clinging inside. Duke, being Duke, shoved his head in. At first, it was probably just to lap at a few drops, but the taste, the curiosity, drove him deeper. Then it shifted in an instant. When he tried to pull free, the neck cinched like a plastic noose. He yanked, panicked, and the hard edge cut into tender flesh. His bark turned to a muffled, strangled sound trapped inside the bottle. Sadie sprang forward, teeth sinking into the plastic with all the force her milk teeth could muster. But every bite only twisted the bottle tighter, every effort sealing the trap. Even now, the thought of it makes my skin crawl. On one side, Duke's frantic gasps. On the other, Sadie's desperate whines. Two small lives caught in the merciless glare of the morning sun. Duke thrashed, staggered, collapsed. Every movement rotated the bottle, grinding the rim deeper. Blood seeped, staining the cloudy plastic into a dark, haunting blur. Sadie didn't flee. She stopped, lowered her head, and licked at the swelling, as if her tongue alone could soothe the agony. From that moment, their roles reversed. Duke, the explorer, was trapped in plastic darkness. Sadie, the cautious follower, became the lone guardian at the gate of life. She was no longer the shadow trailing behind. She was the fragile tether keeping her brother from slipping away. Neighbors remembered seeing them that day. One woman said she watched the pair stumble from the trash heap toward a dead tree. Duke swaying, Sadie pressed against him, almost propping him with each faltering step. To her, it was just two stray pups. To me, the words played like a slow-motion film. Every shaky stride, every ragged breath, every futile lick at the wound. No one had been there to witness it, yet I felt as if I had. I knew the shape of such moments too well. The second curiosity turns into tragedy when a life veers off course because of a single scent. And worst of all, when another soul stands powerless, carrying the weight of helplessness. That bottle, a piece of human waste, had become a death trap. And two pups, in their innocent game, had stumbled into a 3-day nightmare. Duke, the brave one, was dragged into the shadows. Sadie, the careful one, was forced into the role of hopeless sentinel. So when I knelt at the roadside and met their eyes that morning, I understood. The disaster hadn't begun when Duke got stuck. It had begun long before, with neglect, with scattered trash no one bothered to clear, with a town that had turned its face away. And what stopped my breath wasn't only Duke's suffocating fight, it was Sadie, small, fragile Sadie, still there, still choosing to stay. From the very first moment, the nightmare began. If there's one thing I can't erase, it's how time itself trapped those two small lives. Not with claws or growls, but with every burning hour of sun, every night that cut to the bone, every drop of thirst siphoning life away. On the first day, Duke still had the strength to fight. He staggered to his feet, took a few crooked steps, then collapsed face first into the dirt. The cloudy bottle swung with each fall, carving deeper into raw flesh. Every breath rasped like wind through a jammed doorframe. Sadie circled him, whining short, broken notes, tugging at the plastic with her teeth. When nothing worked, she stopped and licked at the swollen red skin, as though her small tongue could ease the fire inside him. By noon, the Oklahoma sun came down like a forge. The earth split open underfoot, no tree tall enough to cast shade. Duke lay panting, belly distended from gulping air he couldn't hold. His tongue hung dry and cracked, yet the bottle barred him from even the smallest sip of water. Sadie's stomach was hollow, her body trembling with hunger, but she refused to leave. When Duke seemed on the edge of collapse, she darted away, 30, 40 steps, until she found a shallow puddle left by last night's rain. She filled her mouth, ran back, and let the drops fall into the tiny gap between the bottle and his neck. Most spilled into dust, but a few trickled down, enough for Duke to swallow. Who could believe a 4-month-old pup would know sacrifice like that? I've often wondered, would we humans have done the same if placed in her place? Nightfall came fast and cold. The wind swept through the skeletal worksite, heavy with the smell of rusted steel and damp earth. Duke curled tight beneath the dead tree, his breathing ragged. Sadie pressed herself against him, her frail body shuddering but forcing itself to become a living blanket. She never slept deeply. Each time Duke twitched, she lifted her head, licking the swelling, humming low whimpers like lullabies. Day 2 dawned, and Duke's strength drained faster. He could barely rise at all. Sadie's ribs stood sharp against her skin, her eyes hollow, yet she never abandoned her post. Neighbors later said she even caught a small field mouse, dragged it back, and tried tearing it into pieces to push through the narrow rim of plastic. But each attempt made Duke cry out as the bottle cut deeper. Scraps of meat fell uselessly to the ground. At last, Sadie ate what was left to keep herself alive, then returned to her post beside him. The second sun was crueler still. No clouds, no shadows. The dirt shimmered with waves of heat. Sadie wavered on her paws but stood firm in the wind, shielding Duke's face from dust. Each gust drove her small body sideways, yet she shifted into its path, a tiny soldier keeping watch. That second night sank colder. Dew formed beads along their thin coats. Duke's body shook with every fractured breath. Sadie curled tighter around him, eyes slit open, always listening. I imagine her head lifting at every sound, an engine rumbling far off, a branch snapping, the call of an owl. Instinct told her to flee, but love made her stay. By the third morning, Duke was barely alive. His eyes clouded, his belly swollen, his throat swollen dark purple like a giant bruise. Sadie scanned the horizon as though she finally understood. If they stayed hidden, no one would ever find them. So she began to do something extraordinary. She dragged her brother from the shadows, pulling him toward the dirt road, toward the faint chance that a human might pass. 3 days. No audience, no camera, no helping hand. Only 2 puppies against the sun, hunger, cold, and the silence of an indifferent world. And through it all, Sadie chose one rare, defiant thing. She stayed. When I think back, what chills me isn't the image of Duke trapped in that bottle. It's the moment Sadie chose the path of survival. A 4-month-old pup, born to run and hide, decides instead to lead her brother out of the shadows toward the very species her instincts told her to fear. On the 3rd morning, the sun hadn't fully risen, and a thin mist still lay across the fields. Duke lay on his side, breath heavy as if stones pressed on his chest. Each swallow made the bottle tighten, jerking his body in violent shudders. I can imagine his eyes then, clouded, almost resigned. If Sadie had simply curled up beside him, it would have ended quietly. But she didn't. That tiny frame pressed her nose into his ribs, shoved hard. Once. Twice. At last, Duke staggered to his feet, legs trembling like reeds in the wind, but he obeyed. Sadie moved ahead, then turned back, urging him with her gaze, "Come on, we have to go." They couldn't get far. Every few dozen yards, Duke collapsed again. Sadie waited, patient. She licked his face, whimpered low, then pushed once more. That journey, step by broken step, stretched across the whole day. No map, no destination, only instinct pulling them toward the one chance left, the dirt road that ran between town and the cornfields. I can see it in my mind as if it were filmed. Two fragile figures dragging themselves across weeds, weaving past broken bricks, skirting rusted frames. Duke, stumbling at every pace, Sadie glued to his side, both companion and guide. There was no prize waiting. Only love kept them moving. By late afternoon, the sun sank red into the west. They reached the edge of the dirt road. Duke collapsed at the grass line, his body finished. Sadie stood over him, ears pointed, eyes fixed on the horizon. The road was empty. Now and then, a pickup or motorbike rattled past. But she knew here was the only place someone might notice. That third night, she would not leave for food. She kept watch, barking soft, clipped cries into the darkness. Calls for help pitched just far enough to carry, but not loud enough to draw predators. Each time an engine hummed in the distance, her ears snapped up, her bark sharpened, pouring every ounce of strength into each sound. Then silence returned, and she went back, curling tight against Duke. I imagine it still. Headlights sweeping the road, two shadows carved in light, one motionless, one standing rigid, unwilling to leave. Duke's breath grew thinner. Sadie's cries grew steadier. She was gambling, placing both their lives in the hands of the very creatures she'd been taught to distrust. Humans. At dawn on the fourth day, the sky washed pale gold. Sadie made her final choice. She nudged Duke again, dragged him closer to the roadside where no grass, no brush could hide them. Exposed, vulnerable, dangerous. But it was the only place where a passerby might see. Duke managed only a few steps before collapsing, belly swollen, breath stuttering. Sadie didn't stop. She pushed again, barked softly, planted her paws in the dust, standing guard. She looked like a soldier at a gate, small but unshakable, daring the world to try and take her brother before his time. And it was that choice, the decision to leave the relative safety of shadow for the danger of open road, that changed everything. Without it, I would never have driven past that morning, and this story would never have been told. That morning, I had no intention of taking County Road 14. A detour forced me off my usual path, and that small shift put me in the right place at the right moment. The sun had just risen over the edge of the fields, casting a pale golden light, but in my chest, there was only a heavy dread when I saw two small figures at the roadside. At first, I noticed only one lying still and one standing guard. But as my truck slowed to a stop, the scene revealed itself as if a curtain had been pulled back. Duke, barely breathing, head locked inside a cloudy bottle, chest heaving, belly grotesquely swollen. And Sadie, planted right in front of him, body trembling yet eyes fixed sharply on me. That wasn't the gaze of a harmless pup. It was the stare of a soldier, demanding, "Are you here to help or to harm?" I stepped out slowly, lowering myself. The instincts of a firefighter kicked in. No sudden moves, no gestures that might spook them. My voice dropped low, steady, like speaking to a frightened child. "Easy now. I'm not here to hurt you." Sadie didn't advance, didn't retreat. She tilted her head just enough to show me the angry wound choking Duke's neck. At that moment, another car pulled up behind. Dr. Eleanor Hayes, my veterinary rescue partner, climbed out. One glance at the scene and she whispered, "God, we don't have much time." We didn't need more words. Years of training spoke for us. The only hope was to cut the bottle off now, but first, both dogs had to be sedated. We gathered our gear. My hand gripped the syringe, heart steady but heavy. One wrong move and Sadie would lunge, or worse, drag Duke away. I crouched lower still, stretching out my hand so the wind would carry my scent to her. Sadie's eyes burned with hesitation. I could almost hear her thinking, "Can I trust you?" I held my gaze soft, motionless, waiting for her choice. When Eleanor signaled, I struck quickly and cleanly. The needle pricked. Sadie jerked, froze. But instead of fleeing, she turned to look at Duke, as if to be sure he was still there. A second injection for him. Within minutes, their bodies softened, eyes half open but limbs heavy. "Now or never," I muttered. Eleanor nodded, pressing a pair of heavy cutters into my hand. The bottle felt slick and filthy, cold with grime. Each snap of the blades echoed sharply, and every time I paused to ensure I wasn't slicing into flesh. The plastic was thick, warped around the swelling, resisting every cut. Sweat dripped down my cheek. At last, the plastic gave way. The bottle split open, and I lifted it from Duke's neck. The wound beneath hit me like a blow. A deep, purple band gouged into flesh, dried blood and pus crusted in angry ridges. His throat was twice its size, skin split into raw channels. I inhaled hard, forcing my hands steady. There was no room for trembling. Eleanor moved fast, spraying disinfectant, wrapping a light bandage, injecting antibiotics, and administering pain relief. Duke whimpered, a thin, frail sound, but his breathing eased without the stranglehold of plastic. Even half-drugged, Sadie turned her head toward him. I laid them side by side on a blanket, and true to instinct, Sadie shifted closer, draping one small paw across his back. My throat locked tight. After everything, even drifting into sedation, she held that silent vow. "I won't let you go alone." We carried them into the truck. I rode in the back, steadying their bodies as the road jolted beneath us. Morning air streamed through the window, rich with damp soil and cut grass. With each bump, Duke sighed faintly, and Sadie shivered, but always pressed closer still. As the truck veered toward the rescue center, I knew we had wrestled life back from the edge, but the real miracle lay elsewhere, in Sadie's eyes. Even drained, even weary, they still burned with the one truth that had carried them this far. Love can outlast death. When our truck turned into the rescue center lot, the sky was already bright, sunlight spilling gold across the grass. Staff were waiting. They carried Duke straight into the treatment room, hung fluids, cleaned his wound, and pushed strong antibiotics. I stood close, listening to the monitor's steady beeps, as if my own heart were being lifted out of fear. Sadie refused to leave. We tried placing her in a separate kennel, but she whined, scratched at the door, eyes never straying from Duke. At last, I told Eleanor, "Let her in. She's been his guard from the start. If we separate them now, it'll break her." Eleanor nodded and opened the gate. Sadie walked in quietly, no barking, no chaos. Just stepped to her brother, sniffed him all over, then lay down with her head across his legs. The entire room seemed to exhale at once. The days that followed were a long climb. Duke was so weak the first 3 days that he hardly moved, only opening his eyes for brief moments. His neck wound was angry, red, and seeping through bandages. Yet every time a nurse changed the dressings, Sadie pressed close, watching every move. When Duke slept, she licked along the edge of the bandage, as if double-checking the care herself. No one had taught her. She simply knew, and she did it, driven by instinct born of love. After a week, Duke began to stand, shaky but upright. We gave him soft, rich food. Sadie sat by, not snatching, just watching, eyes shining with relief at every bite swallowed. The bloated belly shrank, and his breath eased. Fur began growing back along his neck, soft cover over angry scars. Then one morning, I stepped into the backyard of the center and froze at the sight. Duke, stronger now, tugging playfully at Sadie's ear. She stood still a moment, then launched after him, the two of them chasing each other across the grass, paws pounding through morning light. We knew right then, they could never, and should never, be separated. News of the rescue spread through town. Calls poured in, offers to help, to adopt. But one call stayed with me. An elderly couple from outside Tulsa had just lost their 14-year-old dog. They said the house was too empty, every footstep echoing. They wanted both, Duke and Sadie, together. On the day we brought them home, I drove the old pickup down a quiet lane. Their white house came into view, porch wide, green lawn fenced in neat white. I stopped. The door opened and the couple was already waiting. The woman knelt, arms outstretched. Sadie stepped down first, sniffed the air, then turned back to Duke as if to say, "It's safe now." Duke stumbled after her, stubby tail wagging fast. Within seconds, they were gathered up into waiting arms. I sat behind the wheel, eyes blurring. Not sadness. Relief, the deep kind that comes only when you've closed a nightmare and opened a door to peace. The man came forward, shook my hand, and said one simple promise. "We'll keep them together." Always I nodded, unable to speak past the knot in my throat. Now, when I look back, I don't think of the cloudy bottle. Not one of the 3 days of burning sun and freezing nights. I think of Sadie's eyes, planted in front of her brother, demanding, "Are you savior or threat?" I think of her tiny paw draped across his back, even as sedation pulled her under, and I see her curled in the woman's arms on that porch, morning light spilling across her face, eyes finally at peace. People say unconditional love belongs to humans, but I've seen it alive in a pup. Sadie didn't understand sacrifice, didn't weigh cost against gain. She knew only this: don't leave. If you've ever loved a dog, you understand. They don't need promises or oaths. They just stay, beside you, through the worst. And sometimes, that's enough to pull you back from the edge. Every time I drive past County Road 14, I wonder, if I hadn't taken that detour, if Sadie hadn't dared, if Duke hadn't lasted those few more hours, there'd be no ending. But there is. And because of it, I carry a stubborn faith. In a world scarred with neglect and abandonment, love still exists, and it can be strong enough to defeat even survival's hardest odds. So if the story of Duke and Sadie made your heart tighten, then break open. Hold on to that. Bring it home, into how you see your pets, into how you treat every fragile creature, because sometimes they don't need miracles. They just need you. I still remember that last image, Sadie curled against Duke, even safe in their new home. She didn't need words, didn't know the word forever. She knew only one thing: stay. And by staying, she saved him. Have you ever seen love like that? Love that asks nothing back, that only shows up, endures, waits. If a pup can do it, so can we. So no dog, no cat, no soul has to face. If their story moved you, I ask one thing. Leave a comment below. I believe in unconditional love. And if you've ever saved a small life, share that memory. These stories, these sparks, are what keep the fire alive. So no dog, no cat, no soul has to face the dark alone. Don't forget to subscribe so we can meet again on the next rescue journeys that don't just save lives, but save our belief in love itself. And if this story touched you, share it. Somewhere at the right moment, it may give someone the reason to stay, just as Sadie stayed for Duke. Thank you for watching to the end. Thank you for believing that love, when it doesn't leave, can be the very thing that makes miracles real.